Welcome to the Balbriggan Loves Learning CV webinar. My name is Orla and I'm the Guidance Counsellor at the Adult Education Centre in Balbriggan. In this webinar, I'll cover the do's and don'ts of CVs and get you started on creating a winning CV. Be sure to tune in afterwards to our next video where I'm joined by the employment support teams at Empower and the Balbriggan Job Centre for more top tips on developing your CV. First things first. A good CV won't get you a job, but a bad CV will prevent you from being called for interview. You don't get a second chance to make a first impression, so you need to make sure that that first impression is a good one. It is estimated that recruiters spend about 6 seconds on each CV when they are screening applications. So it is really important that you have the right information in the right place on your CV and that it is easy for an employer to see it. Don't waste your chance to get noticed. A common mistake that people make is not looking at the recruitment process from the perspective of the employer. In order to make sure your skills stand out, you need to highlight the ones that are most relevant to this employer and this role. Essentially, the CV is not about you, but about how your skills and experience meet the needs of the employer. Get used to looking at your CV from the perspective of the employer. What do I have that they need? If you ensure that these are the things the recruiter sees in their first 6-second scan of your CV, you will be more successful in getting through the first step of the recruitment process. So, to get the basics right, follow these simple rules. Your CV should be no more than 2 pages long, with the most relevant information appearing on the first page. There is no point in having relevant experience or qualifications that are hidden on the second page of your CV. You can't guarantee that the employer will look that far. Keep the formatting simple. No text boxes. Your font size should be at about 11 or 12 and keep the style consistent throughout. Check your spelling and make sure your email address is a professional sounding one. And double check you have the correct contact details included. The main sections to include on a CV are your personal details, a personal profile or key skills section, your education, employment history, interests and achievements, and if you have some voluntary work, you could include that as well. This is the overall layout that you are aiming for. Please note, there are no hard and fast rules about what particular style you should use. You just need to make sure that it is clear and easy to read. Clear headings and neat formatting make a good first impression. Take a look at your own CV now. How would you rate the overall layout? Are there clear headings? Is it neat and well formatted? Would it pass the 6-second test? Getting the contents right. Section 1, Personal Details. The personal details section should not take up a lot of space on your CV. You do not need to write curriculum vitae across the top or label things like your name and address. We know what these are by looking at them. Include your up-to-date contact details, and if you have a LinkedIn profile, you can include the URL here. You don't need to include your gender, date of birth, or a picture. Should I include a personal profile or skills summary? A personal profile is a very useful way to highlight key skills and experience an employer is looking for very early on in your CV, so that you pass the 6-second test. However, they can be hard to get right and often come across as vague and don't add much value to the CV. Avoid generic statements of skills and traits. They mean nothing and will not do you any favours with employers. Instead, use tangible information to hook the employer. For example, your qualifications, number of years experience, in what setting, and IT skills that are relevant to the role. Here is an example of a bad personal profile. As you can see, this is just a list of adjectives that anyone could include and doesn't give us much information of where this person has developed or used these skills. To make a more impactful profile, keep it factual and concise, no more than 3 or 4 lines, and tailored to the role you are applying for. You can also choose to present this information in bullet point form if that is easier for you. Here is a better example. As you can see, we get a much clearer picture of this candidate's suitability for the role. What section comes next, education or employment history? As we've already mentioned, the most important information needs to come early on in your CV, so you can adjust the order of the sections to fit your circumstances. For those of you who are starting out in your career with very little work experience, or if you have just completed relevant training or education, you will be starting with your education, as that is probably the most relevant to the role you are applying to. And you will have more detail in your education section than someone who has extensive work history. If you have relevant work history, then you are going to start with your employment section. Education and training. Get the basics right. List your education in reverse chronological order. In other words, start with the most recent and move backwards. Are there relevant modules, projects you completed, or significant achievements you would like to highlight to the employer? There is no need to list every single module or subject you studied in school or college. Think about which ones are relevant to this job. Please note that if you have extensive relevant work history that is related to the role, you don't need to provide a lot of detail in your education. Listing your qualifications, college, and dates of study will suffice. For those of you who have recently reskilled to move into a new career area, you could consider having a recent education section to highlight this at the start of the CV, and then list your less relevant education later on in the CV. Don't forget to check out all the courses available through the Adult Education Service in Balbriggan. If you are job seeking, it always looks good on your CV to be engaged in some training or upskilling. Here is an example of an education and training section for someone who has recently returned to education. As you can see, they haven't included every module they have completed, but have chosen the ones most relevant to the role they are applying to. Work history. Get the basics right. Start with your most recent and move backwards. Do not use long paragraphs. Use bullet points only. Avoid the use of I and use action words to make an impact. For example, coordinated, delivered, assisted, supported, organised, etc. Use clear, concise language and avoid the temptation to make things up if your experience is limited. Before you decide what to include on this part of your CV, we recommend that you should brainstorm all the activities you did on a day-to-day basis in your various jobs. Next, assess what skills and competencies these duties demonstrate. The CV is about providing evidence of these skills through the description of your responsibilities. It is useful to provide concrete examples of data and achievements. How many patients did you look after in care settings? What were your sales targets? Were there any significant achievements or projects you were involved in? What IT systems did you use? Here is an example of someone who had a short contract with an events company. She made sure to make the most of her experience and gives a good insight into the skills she used while there. From her description, we can understand that she has customer service, administration, organisational skills, has attention to detail, alongside the ability to work under pressure. She also indicates to us what IT systems she has used. What other sections should I include? Additional sections can include interest and achievements, sports and hobbies, and voluntary work. If your work history is limited, these sections can be a great place to showcase your transferable skills. Don't underestimate the value of your experiences outside the workplace. Remember, if you include something on your CV, you may be asked about it in interview, so only include things that you are prepared to elaborate on at interview. A vital piece of information you should take away with you today is that your CV is never a finished product. It needs to be tailored for each application. This could mean a slight tweak or a complete overhaul depending on the role. Start with the job spec. Understand what they are looking for and assess your CV from the perspective of the employer. If there is something important that they are looking for and you have it on the second page of the CV hidden in the last line, the employer is not going to read it. Do a final check before hitting send. Have you addressed all the key skills outlined in the job spec? Are the most important skills highlighted early on in your CV, and have you given good examples and evidence of these skills? Are the most detailed parts of the CV the ones most relevant to the job spec? Are there sections you think you should elaborate on or ones you feel you should shorten? For a more detailed discussion on these points and some more top tips on developing your CV, tune into the webinar that follows. For additional support and advice, the contact details of the Adult Guidance Service and other support services in Balbriggan are included in the video description.